Welcome to season 13 of the Parenting Aces podcast, a proud member of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, and this is our last episode of the season. I am going to be taking a little break over the holidays. We'll be back with season 14 in mid-January. But in the meantime, I'm super excited to bring you physical therapist Kait Ireland today. I have very personal experience with Kait. She has been treating me for a shoulder injury that started several months ago, and so I can give her just a glowing recommendation. But I'm so excited that she was able to join us to talk about the importance of physical therapy with junior tennis players and really just youth athletes in general, why it's important to have a physical therapist on your child's team. And that team, as you know, first of all, includes you, the parents, but then it's the coach, it's the fitness trainer, it's the mental skills coach, it's the sports medicine doctor, and a massage therapist potentially, and yes, a physical therapist to have on call so that if or when those little injuries pop up, you've got somebody on speed dial that can take a look at your child, that knows your child, understands their body, and can help them heal quickly. So before I bring Kait on, one final reminder about our trip to the Rafa Nadal Academy and to Barcelona next July. As you may or may not know, today is Rafa's last professional match as part of the Spanish Davis Cup team. So wishing him so much happiness and joy as he enters the next stage of things, and super excited to get to go back to his academy in July and bring a group of Parenting Aces families with us. If you are interested in joining us on this trip, all the information's on our website. There's an article at the very top of the page, parentingaces.com. Click on that for pricing, for registration, for itineraries. And if you still have questions, hit me up. I'm happy to answer them and convince you to join us because we're going to have a blast. All right, now sit back, relax, enjoy my conversation with physical therapist Kait Ireland. Kait, so great to see you. It's been a few weeks, which means that I'm on the mend, which means that you do your job really well.
I'm, I'm so flattered to hear that. Happy for you. I know it was quite the journey with your injury.
It has been, yeah, and for my audience that isn't aware, I hurt my shoulder back in April, and then in June got frozen shoulder and sought out physical therapy, and Kait was my savior. Turned out I had all sorts of stuff going on, but the physical therapy was so helpful in getting me back on the court. And as I was telling her, and why I look like this is I just came off of a 3-set match and we won. So, and I can serve again, which is all good news.
Huge wins. So
Yeah.
happy to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we jump in, I want to just give you the opportunity to kind of give our audience a little bit of your background and kind of what led you to become a physical therapist.
Sure. So I've always been really active. I use the word athletic. I grew up playing soccer in Southern California and then dabbled around in different sports from marching band to dancing. I think I did karate and swim team for a while. Anyway, all to say, I tried a bunch of things. I love exploring the world through movement in my body and through athleticism. I became a strength and conditioning coach after college and fell in love, took that passion that I had for my own athleticism and put it towards helping other people create it for themselves. That led me to becoming a physical therapist, and that's where I am now. So I work in the capacity as a physical therapist, but with a background in strength and conditioning. So I feel like I have a good understanding of the spectrum of athletic development and injury prevention across the lifespan.
Yeah. And I think what's so cool is you bring your personal experience into the treatment room, right? So there are things that were going on with my shoulder, for example, and you're like, well, I learned this in school, but that's not working on you. So let's try this other thing that I think may help you. And lo and behold, it did. So I love that about your approach is that you're not just married to this one kind of treatment pattern, but that you're willing to open your mind and continue to learn about alternatives, even recommending that I seek out acupuncture treatments and all of that, which I think, really has made a big difference, at least for me in my injury recovery. But what I want to focus on today is the role of a physical therapist and physical therapy in junior athlete development, because injury is a part of sports. Injury is a part of getting really good at something that's physical. And so I think there tends to be some confusion about when to seek out physical therapy treatment versus when to seek out a medical doctor or massage or acupuncture or all the different options that are out there. So I'm hoping you can kind of clear the air for us a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question, because so many people have different resources available to them. I'd like to say that all physical therapists are created equal or all physicians are created equal, but that's not quite the case. And it's sometimes it can be hard to find somebody who is a reliable resource for a young athlete. All that said, I'd like to think that physical therapists could be that first person contact when an athlete sustains some kind of ache, pain, or injury. And usually I define that as anything that takes away from practice time or gameplay. So if you have an ache or pain or something going on that's keeping you from practicing or playing in your games, matches, tournaments, or that's prohibiting you from going all out for like a week of practices, I think it's worth getting that looked at or screened, just to see if one, there's any red flags, and two, what the steps forward could be. Um, that's usually where I start. I think a physical therapist in an ideal world could be that person. I have a handful of sports medicine doctors who work with pediatric clients who are also good resources for that. But I think one of the hard things about being a youth athlete is you haven't created your network yet of support. And like you alluded to in your own experience, like that team approach, you got to kind of create your own team and figure out who your teammates are going to be on your development process.
Absolutely. So, in tennis, we have the coach that's on court with the player. We have maybe the mental coach or the sports psychologist. We have the fitness trainer. Maybe there's a footwork specialist. Maybe there's a racket technician working with the player. But when something starts to go wrong in the body, whether it's just, this little pain that, as I love that you said that, something that stops you from being able to go all out. And I think that's such a great gauge. But my concern is, and this is where I need you to clarify for us, when is it appropriate to start with a physical therapist and when is it appropriate to start with a physician?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good question. The thing that comes up when I think about those two options is going to a physician. Well, what are the outcomes we're looking for, firstly? Are we looking for some kind of body work, addressing of mechanics, looking at muscle imbalance, or are we looking for, maybe prescription pain relief or pain relief options? Are we looking for imaging? Are we looking for a very specific diagnosis that's only going to come from looking at an MRI? What outcomes are we looking for from that interaction? So, a physical therapist might be that first situation where we're looking to see what might be going on, what might be contributing in terms of mechanics, muscle, pain with range of motion, things like that. With a physician, we're looking at like what could be, do we need more serious pain management as we navigate this? Are we looking for a very distinct diagnosis that we would only achieve with an X-ray, MRI, that kind of test imaging? And some athletes, that's warranted. I have a couple athletes I work with right now who, they're very competitive. They have tournaments planned. They have international travel planned. They need to know right when they get injured what the expectation for recovery is. So in those situations, going to a physician is the first step. But honestly, they go to the physician in the same day they come to see me. And they go to a physician who calls me and I call him, and we work together to create the best plan for that athlete. So it all depends on your stakes, and it depends on how soon you need to get better or have an expectation for recovery, and also what you want as the outcome from those interactions.
Yeah, I love that, because I think it's, if it's an acute injury, something the athlete fell, there's obviously something that looks broken, or, there's a gash or something like that. Obviously, call the physician. That's your first go-to, right? But if it's pain, and I love that you differentiated between somebody that's got a big competition coming up, whether it's a tournament or whatever, versus somebody that's maybe in a training block and has some time to work through that and kind of get it fixed, but it's not so urgent that it be fixed in the moment.
Yeah, I do really think that best case scenario, you have both people on speed dial. You have both options available to you, and they're working together for your best interest.
Yeah, for sure. So when you first see a young athlete that their bodies are still developing, they're, still learning the nuances of their sport, they're still trying to learn the different movement patterns. As they're growing, their movements are changing, and, all of that. What are some of the assessment tools that you like to use to kind of figure out how to proceed in prescribing a course of treatment that you're going to do hands-on in the office, but also things that the athlete can take with them and work on at home?
Yeah. So to clarify, we're looking at like the assessment process. Like, what am I
Hmm.
looking at? I think the three big pieces of things that I look at when people come in, are firstly, I'm always looking to get the picture of the athlete. So I'm a very visual person, so I like to write out training schedule, look at training volumes and demands. That's usually the biggest piece of like the history puzzle and the injury risk puzzle, because as I'm sure you know, changes, abrupt changes in training volume, intensity, type of training can all be a risk factor for injury. So I'm looking to, one, educate, and two, look at what that picture looks like for an athlete. The second piece is mobility. So from global mobility, like what does their whole body look like when they touch their toes, rotate, side bend, stand on one leg, squat. I look at some global functional patterns that will really help me figure out where we need to dive deeper in terms of joints and muscle balance. From there, we look at range of motion. So I feel different joints that are pertinent to either their complaint or their sport. So usually shoulders for tennis players, we're looking at upper back motion and mobility, and then the hips as well. Hips and ankles are big ones for most athletes.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And so once you've looked at those things, and determine that there's some limitation in their range of motion, or maybe their balance is off. And I don't mean balance like they're wobbly when they're standing on one leg, but maybe they have more strength on one side than the other, which is very typical in tennis players, or
Absolutely.
any kind of racket sport, right? Your dominant arm is typically stronger, and maybe there's some imbalance there. What's the next step for you?
Yeah. I guess the question I'm always asking when I'm in my head, when I'm working with somebody, is what are the one or two things that are going to fill in the gap for this person or benefit them the most? What is the most like low hanging fruit that's going to have the biggest effect on their outcome here?
Mhm.
So a lot of people, for example, if we find um, a lack of mobility in a certain joint, for example, like if we see a huge lack of ankle range of motion, that's where we're targeting. So we're looking at active range of motion, we're looking at dynamic stretching and inserting that into their daily routine, and then creating strength so that the body feels comfortable in that extended range of motion.
Okay. And how important is it for you to see the patient on a regular basis as you've given them things to take home and work on, to kind of gauge how they're progressing?
Yeah, I think it's a very case dependent situation. I think it depends on the volume of training that the athlete does. I have athletes I see on a weekly basis, and I have other athletes who check in when things come up. So to that, to answer that question, it can kind of vary across the spectrum.
Yeah.
Um, and also with compliance, like does that person, the biggest thing with youth athletes is consistency. So oftentimes whatever I do in one session is great, can help reset things for them, but it's not going to create the big change they need. So whatever strategy for my interaction with them that helps them be the most consistent with our goals is going to be the best setup for our frequency of seeing each other. So that means if they are really great at doing things on their own, they can replicate what we do in the clinic at home. I don't need to see them as often. They can do it and implement it and kind of self-assess the effect of it and communicate with me through text or whatever, and then they're fine. But some people need to be in the clinic and do their exercises in the clinic, and so we set them up that way.
Got it. When you're working with youth athletes, and I love that you brought up compliance, because it's not just kids that need help with that. I have a lot of peers that, will say, oh, my physical therapy isn't working. And I'm like, well, what are they telling you to do at home? Oh, well, I'm supposed to do this, 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 this. I'm like, well, and are you doing that? Well, not really. It's like, okay, then maybe you need to change your expectations about how this is going to go if you're not willing to do the work. And one of the things I joked with my sports medicine doctor, I'm like, I'm such a good patient. Like, you're going to love having me as a patient, because I'm going to do everything you tell me because I want to get better. But I think especially with kids, it's hard to get them to commit to that. So, are there some things that or tips that you can maybe give the parents to encourage the kids? We don't, as parents, and you're now a mom, so you get this, though yours is still cute and adorable and does everything you want. She has the cutest toddler. But as they get older, as parents, we're not always the voice that our kids want to listen to, especially when it comes to their sports, and they have been told that coach is in control of this, and do what your coach tells you and whatever. So hoping you have some tips for the parents out there whose kids maybe aren't so compliant with their physical therapy.
Yeah, I think the first point to speak of when it comes to compliance, especially physical therapy and like all these little things that we need to be doing in our life, is lack of compliance is not a moral failure. Like you're not a good person because you're compliant or not.
Wait,
First,
what?
I know. I mean, you do get a gold star, Lisa.
Okay, good.
You were a great patient. But generally that just means that more support is needed. I think a lot of youth athletes especially don't have the skill built yet of how to implement a new habit into their schedule and be effective with it. They also have so many competing demands for their time and attention that I don't fault anyone who has a hard time implementing things, because our lives are crazy. Like, where is it going to fit? And figure, like, that process of fitting it somewhere is where I support. So different people have different needs support in different ways.
Okay.
So, for example, sometimes with a certain age group of youth athletes, I think visual reminders are helpful. So I will like stick figure a pretty sheet of paper and draw out what they should be doing. I keep it simple. We have, the set 5 exercises, and they either take a picture of that sheet and have it on their phone, and they know, like, we have the conversation of, when exactly are you going to do this? Are you going to do it before you go to training? And let's talk about that process. You arrive at training. Oh, you arrive at training 10 minutes late and you're running to get into whatever your training looks like. That's probably not going to work there. Okay, maybe at the end of training. Okay, you have you have 10 minutes at the end of training where you normally, take your equipment off. What can you put it there? Okay, let's try that. Oh, the 5 exercises we gave in that time period were too much. Can we do 2? Can we do 3? So I think that piece of helping somebody find where their new habit fits, it can be really effective. I also think that, coming back to the team approach, working as a team with parents and coaches can be really useful, because, like you said, sometimes the parent voice is lost to the child, and having that second voice that says all the same things that the parent voice said can be very effective. And that's another role that I play with youth athletes, is being that second voice. I have no problem texting, with parent permission, youth athletes, and being the accountability partner to whatever the goals that we've outlined are.
I'm so glad you said that. And this was going to be my next question, was talking about accountability, because I think that's something that is so important, but oftentimes gets forgotten. And, it's like we take our kids to a fitness trainer and the trainer says, okay, we're going to do this while you're in the gym with me. And then every day before practice, you're going to do these 5 things, for example, before you start to warm up. And then at the end of practice, you're going to do these other 5 things to cool down and get your body ready for rest and refueling and all those things. And then there's no follow-up. And the kid's really good about doing it for the first few days. And then it goes out the window, and all of a sudden, mom or dad become the nag about, the trainer told you need to do this, this, and this. And my big gripe was always, why is that my job? That's not my job to be the nag. Like, I'm hiring you as a professional. Please hold my child accountable for the things that you tell them they need to do to be better, whether that's, improving their fitness, improving their mental state, improving their technique, whatever it is. But I don't want to be the accountability person.
Yeah, and I think that's an important expectation to set from the beginning of any relationship, is what are the roles and who is accountable for which parts of those. So I have parents across the spectrum. Some, like yourself, don't want to be involved, and some want to be overly involved. They want to be part of, the entire exercise prescription. So I think those conversations and understanding where people fit in the team are very valuable.
And at what point do you have that conversation with a youth athlete and the parent?
I think ideally it happens at the beginning, and then as a second thought, when it's clear that it's not the beginning strategy is not working.
Okay.
So when the outcomes aren't happening, or when the expected compliance is not happening, then we have that conversation of, what are the pieces that we need to change or improve to get the results that we want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So as a preventive measure, where does physical therapy fit in?
This is another like ideal situation. Ideally, physical therapy is part of the preventative piece. I like to think of physical therapy like you would think of an annual doctor's visit. You do like check in with your physical therapist once a year. They have an understanding of your body and your sport, and they can look at the parts of your body that are high risk factors for what you're doing on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis in your sport. So checking in on growth, on mobility, on those strength components that I talked about in our initial assessment question.
Mhm.
And then also just having a person to look at your schedule with, to look at
Yeah.
your intensity, to talk about what's coming in terms of physical development, but also in terms of the changes that happen as athletes progress from lower competition levels to higher ones.
Is there a difference from your perspective as a physical therapist of working with children versus working with adults? And is it important for parents of youth athletes to seek out a therapist that specializes, and I'm using that term loosely, but specializes in youth athletes? Or, does any old physical therapist work?
I always prefer to find somebody who has a good understanding of what you're looking for. So I prefer to have somebody who does specialize in youth athletes. I think that when you find a generalist, you get a general approach. When you find a specialist, you get a specific approach from somebody who likely has more experience and is more up to date on what's going on with youth development, research, and practice. That's one of the things that I see with some of my colleagues in terms of like ACL injuries, for example, is there's been a lot of push and a lot of improvement in the way we treat ACL injuries that somebody who's not involved in that research and involved in that population is not up to date on that. And they're still using old practice and leaving youth athletes susceptible to future injury.
Interesting. And, I think we should clarify that one of the goals of physical therapy is to avoid surgery, right? We're trying to do everything we can to keep the athlete from having to be cut open because that's at least where I sit, and you and I have had this conversation. My dad is an orthopedic surgeon. Um, Surgery is always the last resort. You want to try everything else first. So, but not everybody feels that way. Some people would rather just have the operation, get it done, and move on. One of the things that really kept me coming back with you was that you were willing to keep trying things. Like we're not doing surgery until we've exhausted, and as it turns out, I didn't have something that required surgery, which shoot, but at one point we thought I might. And I think it's important to, as the parent, know what you're looking for. And, are you willing to keep coming back and trying and trying and trying? Or do you just want a surgery to hopefully fix the situation?
Yeah, I think that's an amazing point. I think that I wouldn't say that I'm pro surgery or against surgery by any means, but I do believe in giving surgery the precaution that I believe it warrants because it is a serious thing to have a surgery. And I wouldn't necessarily jump to that if there are other options or without even looking at surgery outcomes. So, for example, in your case, shoulder surgeries have mixed outcomes. So I'm not necessarily jumping to that until that's all we have left. There's other situations where there's more severe injuries, or for example, like certain types of meniscus tears, that surgery is more of the preferred option, but it doesn't always line up just like that. And I think that's where having a good team of a PT that you trust and a physician who is going to give you the straightforward information is your best bet.
Yeah, it's tough to do that research. And I will say that, I resisted going to a doctor for many months because I kept thinking if I go to the doctor, they're going to want to operate, and I'm not ready to make that move yet. And let's face it, even if you have surgery and that's your best option, there is rehab and physical therapy on the other side of it.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. You're definitely
know,
not like skipping PT by any means, going the surgical route. I think sometimes, starting with PT, you have nothing to lose. You're either going to get better or you're going to need surgery like you thought you were, and
yeah.
then do surgery. And usually what you've done in PT sets you up actually for a better outcome. We see that across the board in, leading into shoulder surgeries, leading into knee surgeries, ACL tears. It's great to have that time to do PT beforehand.
Right, because then the body is in its best state to respond positively to the surgery, right? You've addressed all the other things, you've addressed the imbalances, and now hopefully, if surgery is a last resort, then it's going to have a positive outcome, as you said, which, that's what we all want. But I think when it comes to kids, their bodies are growing, they're changing, their nutrition needs are changing. They've got these hormones raging, and, depending on how old they are. And to jump right to surgery for something that's not an acute injury that requires that. And please don't anybody leave this podcast and say, well, she says you should never have surgery. No, there is a place for it. There is a place for medical intervention from a physician, but there's also another route to try in many circumstances where you may be able to avoid the surgical option. And I don't know, I'm all for it. I feel like with tennis, and I know with other sports, but I don't know other sports as well as I know tennis, there's so many little things that start hurting in a tennis player's body, whether it's the knees, start hurting as they're going through a growth spurt, or their low back is hurting when they're learning a new serve that requires, some hyperextension. And maybe their rotation, their ability to rotate fully gets compromised because they're learning a new stroke and everything's tensing up and whatever. And those are the times where physical therapy can really step in and alleviate the little aches and pains that, again, going back to what you said at the beginning, allows the athlete to go full out in practice and in competition without fear. And that's another piece I want to touch on, because
Yes, yes, yes. And
the fear of pain is oftentimes as bad or worse than the pain itself.
absolutely, our bodies are made to protect us and to survive. So, our bodies take that pain input and they say, don't do that again. We're going to create a lot of protection around you, so you don't want to do that again. I do a lot with various injuries and various forms of rehab to combat those narratives around pain. Back pain, for example, our society has a lot of catastrophizing narratives around back pain. A lot of people think the first time they feel something in their back, that's it. That's going to be the back pain they complain about for the rest of their lives. Their back is never going to be the same. But the truth is that firstly, our tissues are adaptable. Our bodies heal. Our back is just like all those other tissues in our body. It can adapt, it can change, it can heal, and it can also be sore when you do something it's not used to. And none of those are causes for concern. And almost oftentimes, when somebody feels that first back pain and then they freak out, what happens? It gets worse because the body says, oh, I'm going to protect even more. And then you have back tension and then this whole sequelae of things that follow, but really stemming from that narrative and that fear.
And you and I talked about that because I was having a lot of that. You're scared to hit hard because 3 months ago it hurt when you hit hard. So now you're like, you've got this thing, we've got to retrain your brain around that. And I thought that was so cool that as a physical therapist that you were educated around that and willing to educate me around that, to reprogram what's going on up here so that my body could perform the movements that it's been performing, for 50 something years.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, when we talk about youth athlete development, that's one of the great roles that, having a good PT or a good sport med doctor on your team, on your personal team, can be really helpful for, because I think as you go from being made of jello, right? When you're like really, really young to like starting to have aches and pains. And it's really hard to differentiate the different sensations our body gives us. Is it a stretch sensation? Is it an achy sensation? Is this something I should push into or push through? Or is this something that's a red flag? It's hard to know. And having somebody in your court that can kind of decipher that with you and be like, this is what this is. So, going forward. And I think learning how to advocate for your own body as a youth athlete is the most invaluable skill, because nobody is going to know what's going on in your body except you. And nobody's going to be able to set you up to take care of nobody's going to take care of your body like you are. Your
Right.
coaches, like your teammates, they're going to do whatever they can, but you're going to be the person across the different teams and organizations you play for who needs to protect your own body.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the benefits of having these medical professionals on the team is the youth athlete then learns language around all of this as well. So, on this podcast, we talk about communication all the time, and like it's good communication is at the core of pretty much everything. And this is yet another area where, you can't expect an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old to be able to clearly communicate sensations that they're having in their bodies if they've never been taught that language. And so understanding the difference, as you're saying, Kate, between something that is a red flag or something that, hey, this is just a little bit of pain, it's okay, you're not going to do damage, keep going,
Yes.
is really helpful.
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So how does somebody go about finding the right physical therapist? What are some of the qualifications that we should be looking for, or questions that we should ask when we're deciding who to bring onto our team?
Yes, I think that's a really hard question. Um, I am a
Especially
big,
depending on where you live.
depending on where you live. Um, I'm going to say something that most people probably don't say. I love social media. I love finding people to work with through social media, and connecting that way. I think that watching somebody's like Instagram, you can really get an idea of what they value, what they do, who they are, and if they're going to be the right person to have on your team. That being said, I also think that doing some research, finding a practitioner in your area, maybe that other people like, other people use, can be beneficial. And then set up your consultation with them or a phone call, get to know what they're like. Don't feel like once you've had one session with somebody, you need to commit. But also, if you align with what they're presenting, that might be a good person for your team. But similar to like other coaches and people on your team, not everyone has to last forever. You can go through a phase with somebody and then, be like, I've learned all I can from this person. It's time to try something new. It's time to expand my, knowledge in a different way, what
Yeah.
have you.
And I will say, if you have health insurance, I mean, going through your health insurance website to see if there are any people that your insurance will help cover the cost is always a bonus, but don't limit yourself to that, because I've heard some horror stories about people just going through their website for these types of therapies, and it just hasn't turned out well.
It's a really hard world because myself, for example, I work out of network with insurance. I'm a physical therapist with a sports background, a strength and conditioning background. I think that's really valuable. The hard thing is a lot of people have that certification, but they don't have experience. They've never actually worked one-on-one or like in a setting when they're working with athletes. So I think doing your due diligence and research to find who's going to be the good fit for you is important, and who's available in your area. Just know that PTs, we're not created equal. Like, some of us are a great fit for certain populations, certain individuals, and others of us are better fit for you.
And it's not like you can do this virtually. It's not like a mental health specialist or, a mental training coach for tennis players where you can do a Zoom and, get the benefit. This has to be in person. So if you live in an area where you don't have a lot of options, sometimes that does make it challenging. But I think the important thing is to ask the questions, and the questions would be, where did you do your training? What is your degree in? What did you do before this? Did you grow up playing sports? I mean, what am I missing?
Yeah, I think I would probably go also the direction of what does your support of athletes look like? I would be curious how people would answer that. I like to work a little bit outside the box and let it be a mesh of what the athlete needs and what I can provide. Other people are more strict in the way they practice physical therapy and will be, only see somebody who has a specific prescription from a doctor. So, and like only see them for that body part versus more of a wellness approach and a preventative approach. I'd be curious about what infrastructure they have in place to support more of the wellness approach.
I like that. I think that's really important. And, before all of you watching or listening to this say, oh my God, now we've got another thing to spend money on for our kids' tennis. The thing is if their body's not healthy, they can't train properly and they can't compete properly. And if they're in pain from that injury or whatever it is, that imbalance, they're not going to have fun out there. It's no fun to be in pain every time you get on the tennis court. So, and I'm telling you this now from personal experience. So, you got to take care of it, and it's not going to just go away on its own most of the time. There are certainly some things that, maybe you tweak something, you turned your ankle funny and you go home and you ice it and then it's fine the next day. But there are other things that really do require the intervention of a professional that can, keep an eye on what's happening in the athlete's body, what's happening in terms of the level of competition that they're involved in, level of training they're involved in, and ensure that they have the longevity that they want, whatever that means for them.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Good. Okay. So, Kait, if people are interested in learning more about you and what you do, how do they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I'm Empowered Athletics PT, and I currently practice at Rio Physical Therapy in Laguna Niguel.
And we'll have those links in the show notes on parentingaces.com. Do you do phone consults? Are you open to that, or
Yes,
email or whatever?
I do phone consults, video consults. I know you mentioned that, yes, PT is best in person, but PT can also be offered virtually and remotely. It's different.
Okay. What does that look like?
It looks like us talking over Zoom, but me watching you move through a range of motion, asking you to feel things, or if, it's a parent and child, like I could demonstrate how, a test that I need to perform or data that I need to be collected. But it's still trying to solve this problem, right? Whatever problem's going on, and seeing what pieces of information we need to make a decision or make a plan going forward.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So I'm
Cool.
glad you corrected me on that. So for those of you out there that are interested in working with Kait or at least talking with her, please check the show notes for her contact info. Be sure to follow her on Instagram, I mean, for no other reason than to see your son. Oh my gosh, he is the cutest. And we will have all her contact info in the show notes as well. Kait, thank you so much for doing this. I know you've got a patient waiting for you, so I'm going to let you go get ready, but it's great to see you. And hopefully I won't need you on a professional level, but I hope we'll stay in touch otherwise.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thanks, Kait. To all of you watching and listening, thank you so much for tuning in. Can't believe this is our last episode of season 13. So we will see you in January for season 14 of the Parenting Aces podcast. Have a great holiday season and just enjoy being with friends, enjoy being with family, love on each other, and can't wait to see y'all in January. Bye.